June 3, 1944. 0610 hours. Western slopes of the Trnovo Plateau, Slovenia. Cold mist drifted between the spruce trunks and rolled down the terraces where sheep once grazed. The valley road below carried the grinding sound of an approaching German patrol. 12 men. Waffen SS. Standard reconnaissance pattern for this sector. They moved without caution because they believed the hills were empty. They believed the locals could not hit anything past 200 meters. They believed wrong, although they did not know it yet. Private Milan Oro lay flat on a patch of crushed pine needles 30 meters above the road. He kept his cheek against the worn stock of his Yugoslav Model 24 rifle. The iron sights shimmered in the rising light. The wind shifted up the slope from the south, carrying the smell of clay and wet moss. Milan read the wind in a second. Years of moving sheep across ridges had trained him to feel small changes with precision. A shepherd's life had shaped him more than any barracks drill ever could. He breathed slow. He kept his elbows locked into the soil. Beneath the rifle, anchored into a gap between two rocks, sat an object that looked strange on a battlefield. It looked like a piece of a farm gate hacked apart and rebuilt into a wedge. Heavy wood at the base. A slanted support arm. An iron hinge pinned into the top. The hinge was old. Milan had pulled it off the ruins of a burn shed 2 weeks earlier. He built the device at night, using a pocket knife and a cold chisel. It weighed less than 2 kilograms. It steadied a rifle better than any sandbag. He called it the Old Gate Rest. The name came from the pastures of his childhood on the slopes above Lochv. His family kept sheep there through storms, droughts, and hard winters. The pasture gates leaned downhill because the posts had sunk from decades of animals rubbing past them. The slant created a natural brace. You could rest a shepherd's staff or a rifle on it and keep aim steady on uneven ground. His father used to lean a carbine on that gate when foxes hunted the lambs. Milan remembered that perfect stability. He remembered the calm that came from it. After joining the partisans at 19, he realized the war had given him the same landscape, the same steep ground, and the same need for a stable rifle. German patrols had learned to walk boldly because partisan shots fell wide at long distance. Scopes were rare. Sandbags were heavy. Shooting positions on mountainsides were unstable. Men shook under recoil because they had nothing to anchor against. The Germans trusted those limitations. Milan saw an opportunity inside that trust. He understood that distance favored whoever could hold the rifle steady. He decided he would be that person. He waited for the lead SS sergeant to step into the clear gap in the trees where the road turned. The sergeant marched ahead with a submachine gun over his chest, scanning casually left and right. He expected no threat. Milan watched the rhythm of his walk. He counted the seconds between each step. He knew he could not afford a second shot. One shot must stop the patrol. Otherwise they would scatter and vanish into the trees. The sergeant reached the bend. Milan lowered his breathing even more. The rifle lay perfectly aligned along the slanted hinge. He had tested this rest for 3 mornings before the patrol appeared. Each test shot struck a chalk mark on a tree trunk more than 400 meters away. He marked the point of impact in his mind. He trusted the tool because it came from the land that raised him. Wood and iron from a pasture shaped by necessity. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked across the valley. Birds scattered from the pine branches above. The sergeant dropped instantly, his helmet rolling into the ditch. The patrol froze. None of them knew where the shot came from. Some crouched. Some bolted behind trees. One shouted in German for covering fire. They sprayed the opposite hillside at random. Their shots hit bark and rock. Milan stayed still. He had already confirmed that his position could not be spotted from the road. The slope hit him. The mist hit him. The Old Gate Rest kept his rifle from shaking even under the recoil of the first shot. He did not fire again. He did not need to. Patrol doctrine told the Germans to pull back if they could not find the shooter immediately. They dragged the sergeant's body 20 meters before leaving it and retreating up the road. Their boots stamped marks of confusion and panic into the mud. Milan did not move for another 5 minutes. Then he lifted the rifle from the hinge, folded the wooden base under his arm, and slipped through the trees toward a narrow ravine. He covered his tracks with fallen branches. He moved like a shepherd taking shortcuts between pastures. Quiet. Efficient. Certain of the land beneath him. By noon he reached a makeshift partisan camp hidden between moss rocks and old spruce roots. The fighters sat around a thin fire, boiling nettles and potatoes. They had been losing men to German patrols for weeks. Their weapons were mismatched and worn. They had no scoped rifles. They had no mortar rounds. They had no proper shooting platforms. They had fear in their eyes, but they hid it behind bitter jokes. Sergeant Velko Radic, the unofficial commander of the camp, looked up when Milan arrived. Velko had fought since 1941. He had scars on his forearms from shrapnel. He did not smile often. He nodded once at Milan's return. "Anything on the road?" Velko asked. Milan set the rifle down and gave a simple answer. "One patrol turned back." Velko raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Milan placed the wooden rest on the ground. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "Distance helps us if we can reach it." Velko did not understand yet. None of them understood yet. But they soon would. June 3, 1944. 1,540 hours. The Trnovo Plateau wind shifted northwest. Clouds gathered low over the ridges. The campfire hissed as damp air settled across the ravine. Partisan fighters prepared for evening patrol rotation. Boots tightened. Bolts inspected. Ammunition counted. The tension that lived in every mountain unit returned, steady and familiar. Milan sat near the camp perimeter, sharpening the hinge pin of his gate rest with a file. The wood carried the scent of pasture soil, old and clean. The iron hinge glinted under the thin light. He made careful adjustments, shaving uneven edges, adjusting the angle, improving the slant by a fraction of a degree. He worked with the same calm he once used repairing flock pens on a windy ridge. Every movement was measured. Two younger fighters approached. They had watched him leave at dawn. They knew he had returned without injury. They also knew the Germans did not come farther down the road after the first rifle report echoed through the valley. One of them, Petr Blazevik, pointed at the wooden rest. "What is that thing?" Milan said, "A brace for the rifle." Petr crouched and inspected it. He touched the hinge, then the slanted support. "Looks like a gate from a farm." Milan nodded. "Close enough." The other fighter, Luka, shook his head. "You hit that patrol at long distance. No one here hits anything past 200 meters. You expect us to believe this tool changed that?" Milan did not defend himself. He simply said, "Try it." He slid the rest toward Luka and pointed at a rock 20 meters away. Luka placed his rifle on the hinge. The slanted wood caught. The rifle stock and held it steady. Luka aimed. His breathing slowed without effort. The support removed the tremor that usually plagued men on uneven ground. Luka pulled the trigger. The shot struck precisely on the rock's center. He looked at the rest again, confused and impressed at the same time. "You can aim longer without shaking," Luka said. "You can place the rifle the same way every time," Petr added. Milan said, "That is the point. Consistency at distance." Sergeant Velko walked over. He had been listening from a distance. He crouched and lifted the rest in both hands. He turned it around, studying each part with sharp eyes. Velko valued practical tools. He respected ideas that helped men survive. But he feared anything that could expose the unit. "You used this on the ridge," Velko said. "Yes." Velko considered the hinge again. "How far was your shot?" 400 meters. The fighters around them went silent. No one in the camp had achieved a clean shot at that range for weeks. They lacked scopes. They lacked training. They lacked positions stable enough for consistency. Velko studied Milan's face, looking for any sign of exaggeration. He found none. "What happens when they trace the sound?" Velko asked. "They cannot." "Not from that slope," Milan said. Velko set the rest down. "This device changes patterns. German patrols count the distance of incoming fire. If they think we can shoot farther, they increase pressure. They bring heavier weapons. They lock down movement." Milan said, "If they stay out of range, the villages stay safe." Velko stared at him for a full second. The logic was simple. Distance was protection. The Germans only moved boldly because they felt untouchable. If they believed the hills could strike them at long range, they would slow down. Slowing them down meant fewer raids. Fewer burned farms. Fewer dead civilians. Velko took a long breath. "You built this from scrap?" "Yes." "You plan to make more?" "If the wood holds." Velko nodded once. The argument ended. He understood that war was not won by doctrine. It was won by adaptation. Even so, he kept concern in his tone. "Keep this quiet for now. If command hears you are modifying weapons, they will ask questions." Milan said nothing. He knew command feared anything that might reveal their positions. They followed old rules. They followed procedures designed for flat ground and organized armies. The mountains required different thinking. By late afternoon the air grew colder. Clouds thickened. A storm prepared to fall over the plateau. Milan packed his rifle, ammunition, and the gate rest for another test. He did not join the evening patrol. He slipped away from camp and climbed a narrow ridge marked by wild blueberry shrubs. Rain began to fall in thin sheets. The slope became slick. His boots gripped the mud with difficulty. He reached a vantage point above a fork in the valley road. Germans used this fork to approach villages. Milan planted the rest between two stones and tested the stability. Even in rain it held firm. The slanted design prevented sliding. The hinge offered the perfect pivot. He aimed at a lone tree 500 meters away. He fired. The bark splintered near the chalk mark he had carved earlier. He adjusted. Fired again. The second round hit the center. Rain masked the sound. Wind carried the thunder of the shot away from the road. This place was perfect for long-range control of the valley. The next morning, June 4th, another German patrol moved through the same route. 11 men. 1 machine gunner. Light formation. Confident pattern. Milan settled into position before dawn. He used the gate rest without hesitation. The lead corporal stepped into view. Milan watched the rise and fall of the man's shoulders. He felt the wind shift slightly southeast. He adjusted half a degree. He fired. The corporal dropped. The machine gunner dove behind a tree. Confusion spread across the patrol like a sudden wave. They returned fire blindly toward the wrong ridge. They shouted. They crawled. They found no target. After 2 minutes of chaos they retreated the same way as the patrol before them. This time Milan fired a second shot. He aimed not at a man but at the machine gunner's ammunition belt. A spark kicked up dust near the belt. The gunner abandoned it and fled. The patrol left the valley entirely. Milan knew what this meant. Patrol patterns would change. German discipline relied on predictable threats. A new threat forced new behavior. He collected his gate rest. He moved downhill. The rain stopped. The sky cleared. Sunlight broke through clouds and hit the wet pines with a pale glow. Milan reached the camp by noon. Velko met him first. Another patrol, Velko said. We heard 2 shots. Milan nodded. Same result. Yes. Velko looked at the gate rest with new respect. This thing of yours might force them to stay off the valley roads. Milan said, that is the goal. Others will want to copy it, Velko said. That is also the goal. Velko exhaled sharply. Then we need more wood. June 7, 1944. Dense fog covered the Chernovo Plateau. A cold front moved from the Julian Alps and pushed thick clouds into the valleys. The forest floor stayed wet. Pine needles clung to boots. The air smelled of resin and stone. German patrols avoided moving in fog, but supply squads still used the lower paths. They assumed the terrain protected them. They assumed the partisans could not see far enough to create danger. Milan stood beneath a spruce tree shaping a second gate rest. He had scoured abandoned barns and broken sheep pens for hinges. Some were rusted. Some were warped. He tested each by rotating the joint back and forth until it moved smoothly. He used only the hinges that could support weight under recoil. Partisan fighters watched him work. They saw the precision in his hands. They understood the tool was not superstition. It was a method. Luca returned from a morning patrol and dropped a plank of old barnwood beside Milan. Found this near a collapsed shed, Luca said. Hardwood. Dry. Should hold. Milan measured the grain with his thumb. Was good. It would not splinter. He cut it into a slanted wedge. He pressed the hinge onto the top edge. He hammered it lightly with a stone. The device took shape in less than an hour. Simple tools. Simple materials. Maximum stability on uneven ground. Petter studied the angle. You make it the same every time. Milan nodded. Consistency keeps the rifle stable. Luca said, Command should see this. Milan replied softly. Command fears long-range fire. They fear artillery response. Petter frowned. But we finally have something that gives us an advantage. Milan said, we use it until they understand it works. By afternoon the fog thickened. Visibility shrank to 30 meters. Velko returned from a scouting trip along the eastern ridge. His coat was soaked. His boots were muddy. He called Milan aside. We have movement, Velko said. A supply squad. 8 men. 2 mules. They plan to pass through the North Fork by sunrise. Milan nodded. The North Fork sat between 2 rising slopes. Both sides offered high ground. Perfect for the gate rest. Velko knew it. Milan knew it. The Germans did not. Velko continued. We cannot risk a direct ambush. Too loud. They will call reinforcements. But a single shot could turn them back. Milan understood without further explanation. June 8, 1944. 0520 hours. Mist clung to the trees. Milan reached the ridge 20 minutes before the supply squad. He planted the gate rest between two flat rocks. He cleared pine needles from the hinge. He loaded his rifle. He lay prone and listened. The distant clatter of mule hooves echoed up the valley. German voices followed. Come. Unaware. The squad marched in a tight formation, rifles at low ready. They believed the fog protected them. They believed the partisans lacked precision in weather like this. Milan read the air. He felt the wind flow along the slope. Light and steady. He placed the rifle into the hinge. The wood absorbed vibration. The rest braced the rifle so well that even his heartbeat barely shifted the sight picture. The lead supply carrier stepped into view. Milan did not target him. The supply sergeant walked behind the second mule. If the sergeant fell, the formation collapsed at once. If the mule panicked, the squad retreated. Milan squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The sergeant dropped. The mule reared. The squad scrambled into the fog. They shouted at each other. Some crouched behind the animals. Some tried to drag the body. Chaos replaced discipline. After 30 seconds of confusion, they turned around and abandoned the route entirely. Milan studied their withdrawal. No one fired back. No one searched for the shooter. The fog concealed everything. The gate rest made long-range accuracy possible even in near-zero visibility. The Germans had no answer. When Milan returned to camp, the fighters gathered around him as if he had brought a weapon they had never seen before. They asked for details. They asked for measurements. They asked how to place the hinge for best effect. By evening, 3 men had built their own versions. One used a barn plank. Another used a broken window frame. The third used the leg of a collapsed table. None of them matched Milan's precision, but they were stable enough to improve accuracy at distance. Velko walked through the camp inspecting each new rest. He gave minor corrections. He tested each one by bracing a rifle against it. For the first time in weeks he saw possibility in the eyes of his fighters. German patrols will slow, Velko said. We use that time. That night a messenger from a nearby partisan unit visited the camp. His coat was torn. His voice was tired. He carried news. 2 patrols pulled back from the southern road, the messenger said. They reported long-range fire. They thought it came from heavy rifles. Velko exchanged a look with Milan. The messenger continued. Command wants to know if anyone in this region fired shots beyond 400 meters. Velko spoke carefully. Just rifles. No heavy weapons. Then how did the shots land? The messenger asked. Velko pointed at Milan's device. The messenger lifted it, puzzled. What is this? Milan answered. Arrest. The messenger shook his head. Command will say it is unauthorized. Velko said, Command can come see the slopes themselves. The messenger left before dawn. He took one of the simpler rests with him to show higher officers. Milan watched him disappear into the fog. He knew the reaction Command would have. Fear of exposure. Fear of German reprisal. Fear of innovation. June 10, 1944. A larger German force entered the valley. 2 squads. Better coordination. They moved cautiously. Helmets low. Rifles ready. They expected attack. They advanced along the lower trail, covering angles. They stopped often to listen. They had learned. Milan and 2 fighters positioned themselves on a ridge overlooking the trail. They planted 2 gate rests between rocks. The third rest braced against a tree trunk. Rain began to fall again. The forest darkened. Milan whispered to Luca and Petter. Pick the same target. Leader. Right side. Wait for signal. The German unit stepped into the open space near the old stone wall. Milan raised 2 fingers. The fighters tightened their grips. Milan lowered his hand. 3 shots cracked across the ridge. The German leader fell instantly. His radio operator dropped to his knees. Confusion spread like wildfire. The Germans split in 2 directions. Some fired blindly uphill. Others crawled behind rocks. They tried to advance but could not find the shooters. They pushed no deeper into the valley. After 5 minutes of unanswered fire they retreated. Luca looked at the gate rest. This changes everything. Milan kept his eyes on the retreating figures. Only if we keep using it. He understood that control of distance meant control of movement. The Germans could not dominate the valley if they could not safely enter it. The partisans did not need superiority. They needed consistency. The gate rest gave them exactly that. By nightfall the camp carried a different energy. Fighters spoke in quieter tones. Not fear. Focus. They knew they had a tool that could even the field. They knew wood and iron could change the pattern of the war in their region. They also knew the Germans would respond with force once they recognized the threat. Milan sat alone near the edge of camp, carving a new slant into a fresh piece of wood. He worked slowly and calmly. He did not think of glory. He thought of villages, sheep pastures, old gates leaning in the wind. He thought of the land he protected. He knew the war would soon test his invention to its limit. June 16, 1944. Heavy clouds hung over the Trnovo Plateau. Thunder rolled across the ridges. The air carried the sharp scent of wet stone. German command in the region had circulated new warnings. Reports described an unknown long-range threat. Patrol leaders were told to expect ambushes from unusually stable shooting positions. They were told to avoid exposed bends in the road. They were told to change routines. For the first time in months, German forces moved with visible caution. They advanced in smaller groups. They paused more often. Their scouts scanned slopes with binoculars. Their machine gunners kept barrels pointed toward the ridgelines. The landscape that once felt safe now felt hostile to them. Distance was no longer their advantage. In the partisan camp, Milan worked with a new group of fighters. These were older men from neighboring villages. Their hands were calloused from farm labor. Their shooting skills were limited, but their patience was deep. Milan showed them how to plant the rest into soil, how to wedge it between roots, how to feel the rifle settle into the hinge, how to align breath with the slanted support so that the shot broke clean. One of the older men, Jur, asked, "Why this angle?" Milan answered, "The slant holds the weight. The hinge controls the recoil." Another asked, "What if the Germans bring mortars?" "They will only fire if they find us," Milan said. "We do not fire twice from the same place." The fighters nodded. They understood the principle. Mobility preserved survival. By midday, 4 new rests were finished. Rough but functional. Velko tested each with a single shot into a stump. He adjusted one hinge, tightened another with wire, and approved the rest. Word of the device spread through nearby partisan groups. Some sent young couriers to watch Milan build. Others asked for written measurements. Some sent wood. Some sent hinges. Improvised versions appeared across the plateau. Command still had not sanctioned their use. Fighters used them anyway. In the mountains, survival was more important than rules. That evening, a 19-year-old scout named Marjeta returned from an observation post with urgent news. She had seen smoke columns rising from the south road. German vehicles. Not patrol size. Larger. Velko gathered the fighters. They are preparing a sweep. A full advance. Searching for long-range shooters. Everyone knew what that meant. More men. More weapons. More pressure. These sweeps destroyed villages if partisans were found nearby. Milan understood the stakes. The Germans believed long-range fire meant stronger weapons. They expected heavy rifles or foreign supplies. They did not understand the truth. Just wood and iron shaped by a shepherd. Velko pointed to the slopes north of the camp. "We hold high ground. We force them to turn back. We do not trade fire. We strike only when we can break formation." June 17, 1944. 0620 hours. The Northern Valley. A long column of German troops advanced along the road. 30 men. 2 light machine guns. Radio operator. Squad leader with binoculars. This was a sweep force. They came prepared to search the hills. Their boots stamped the mud in steady rhythm. Their formation was tight and methodical. Milan reached a ridge overlooking the valley before the Germans did. Luka and Peter followed him. Jur took position behind a stone wall further east. Marjeta observed from a tree hollow. Each fighter carried a gate rest. Each moved quietly. The ridge was narrow. Pine roots twisted through the soil. The slope dropped sharply to the road. Milan planted his rest in a crevice between 2 large rocks. The angle held perfectly. Luka placed his rest against a fallen trunk. Peter wedged his between exposed roots. They checked wind. They checked sight lines. They waited. The German column slowed at a clearing where the road widened. The squad leader raised binoculars. He scanned the ridges. He knew something hunted these slopes. He expected a shot. He expected an ambush. But he looked for conventional signs. Sandbags. Nest positions. Dug holes. He did not look for wood. Milan whispered to Luka and Peter. "Only 1 shot each. No more." They nodded. Milan aimed at the radio operator. Without him, the sweep would lose coordination. Luka aimed at the machine gunner. Peter aimed at the squad leader. Milan exhaled. The hinge held the rifle steady. He squeezed the trigger. 3 shots cracked through the valley. The radio operator collapsed. The machine gunner dropped beside him. The squad leader fell back against a tree. Chaos spread. German soldiers scrambled behind rocks. Some fired uphill. Some dragged bodies. The sweep force lost its structure within seconds. They attempted to regroup. They tried to identify where the shots came from. But there was no muzzle flash to follow. No exposed silhouette. The slanted rests allowed the partisans to fire from low positions, hidden by terrain. The Germans fired wildly at the treeline. Bullets snapped through branches above Milan. He stayed flat. He waited. The Germans searched for direction. They found none. After 5 minutes, the column retreated 30 meters and formed a defensive ring. They signaled for backup with hand flares. A red flare burst above the valley. It drifted downward in thick smoke. Velko arrived at the ridge, breathing hard. We cannot stay. Mortars will come. Milan lifted the gate rest. Luca grabbed his. Peter followed. They fled along the ridge path, moving fast through undergrowth. The ridge curved away from the valley. By the time German reinforcements arrived, the partisans were gone. When the mortars fell, the ridge lay empty. Velko regrouped the fighters near a ravine. He spoke with urgency. This tactic works. It breaks formations. It forces retreats. But the Germans will not give up. They will adapt. Jur said, then we adapt too. Milan looked at the gate rest in his hands. It was chipped. Mud covered the hinge. It still held firm. He felt the weight of what it represented. It was no longer just a tool. It was a method that reshaped how the partisans used the mountains. The next morning, scouts reported that the sweep force had withdrawn entirely from the northern valley. They left markers warning soldiers to avoid the ridge. They believed a sniper team with specialized rifles occupied the slope. Their caution bought the partisans time. Villagers returned to fields. Shepherds returned to pastures. Livestock moved again through the terraces. For a brief moment, the land breathed. But the war did not stop. June 20th brought harsher news. A captured German map revealed a plan to push deeper into the hills in a week. They intended to burn suspected hideouts. They intended to starve partisan units by cutting supply routes. They intended to break the resistance. Velko held the map in his hands. They think they can crush us before summer ends. Milan said, they need clear roads to do that. We deny them roads. Velko looked at him. With your rests. With the slopes, Milan said. The rests help us use what we already have. Velko nodded. Then we prepare. Preparations began immediately. Fighters built more rests. They tested them on stones, walls, and tree stumps. They memorized ridge routes. They marked wind patterns. They stored ammunition in hollow logs. They moved quietly through the forest, shaping the land into weapon and shield. Milan walked alone at dusk toward the highest pasture he knew. The same pasture where he had watched storms roll in as a child. The same pasture where his father had leaned an old rifle on a slanted gate to defend their flock. He found one gate still standing. Slanted. Weathered. The wood had turned gray under years of rain. The hinge had rusted through. He touched the gate with his hand. The grain felt familiar. Solid. Patient. Born of this land. He understood that the war would test him further. He also understood that the Germans had not yet seen what the mountains could do. June 24, 1944. A dry wind swept across the high ridges of the Trnovo Plateau. Pine branches creaked in the breeze. The sky cleared for the first time in several days. German forces gathered at the southern road junction. 2 squads. Additional ammunition mules. A field officer with field glasses and a folded operations map. The sweeping attacks had failed to break the resistance. Their commanders believed that a coordinated multi-road push would succeed where single advances had not. Partisan scouts observed the formation from concealed tree hollows. They memorized numbers. They marked routes. They returned to the camp before noon. Velko listened to the reports. He kept a hand on the map carved with crude charcoal lines. They plan to split into 3 groups. They believe we are hiding on the central ridge. They expect long-range fire from 2 positions. Milan studied the charcoal lines. We shift the pattern. Hit one group, not all. Make them retreat before they reach the tree line. Velko said, which group? Milan traced a finger across the map. The western group. They will pass below the old terraced fields. The slope is narrow. Good vantage points. Good retreat paths. Peter agreed. The rocks there form natural rests even without wood. Luca added, and the wind is steady on that side. Velko nodded. That is our ground. The fighters moved before sunset. They carried rifles, ammunition, and 5-gate rests. They traveled along goat paths that wound through spruce roots. They passed under low branches. They reached the western terraces as evening light faded. The terraces had once held rows of potatoes and barley, but war had emptied them. Grass grew tall. Stone walls crumbled in sections. The land carried the faint scent of old harvests. Milan knelt and tested the soil. Dry. Firm. Good for planting the rest. He pointed to positions along the slope. 2 rests near the wall. 1 near the hollow stump. 1 on the highest rock shelf. The last near the narrow tree cluster. The fighters spread out. Jur took the wall. Luka took the stump. Petr climbed to the rock shelf. Milan placed his rest near the tree cluster, where 2 young spruces leaned together like twin posts. The angle was perfect for concealment. He set the hinge against a stone and pressed his rifle onto it. It held steady. The night passed in silence. At dawn, fog lifted in thin sheets. The western group moved into the terraces. 11 soldiers. 1 machine gun gunner. 1 officer with a map pouch. They advanced slowly, rifles raised. They scanned the slopes. Milan watched them approach. The wooden rest absorbed his breathing rhythm. Every shift of wind came through the pine needles. He felt the range. He listened to the officer's commands. He measured timing. The officer pointed toward the upper ridge. He believed the threat was higher than it truly was. That mistake opened a window. Milan signaled with a small movement of his left hand. Luka tightened his grip. Petr aligned his sights. Jur waited behind the stone wall. Milan whispered, 3 targets. Officer. Machine gunner. Rear scout. 1 shot each. He inhaled. He pressed the rifle into the slanted hinge. He fired. 3 shots cracked together. The officer collapsed against the terrace stones. The machine gunner dropped beside the mule. The rear scout fell onto his back, rifle clattering downhill. The remaining Germans dove behind the terrace walls. They shouted. They fired uphill without direction. Petr fired a second shot, hitting a rock near the closest soldier's cover. Dust sprayed into the air. Panic increased. The Germans backed away from the terraces and retreated toward the lower road. The formation broke in under a minute. The partisans disappeared into the forest. Their footsteps left almost no trace on the dry soil. Velko met them later near a ravine. The other groups halted, Velko said. They saw the western team fall back and assumed heavy weapons were on the slope. They turned around. Milan looked at the gate rest still in his hand. The hinge had held perfectly. The wood had not cracked. The slanted angle remained unchanged. This tool had reshaped an entire morning's advance. The next day, a liaison officer from a neighboring partisan brigade arrived. He carried a notebook filled with reports. He asked Velko, "Your unit's long-range accuracy has increased significantly. How?" Velko nodded toward Milan. The liaison turned. "Explain your method." Milan picked up 1 rest and held it in both hands. "This stabilizes a rifle on slopes. It reduces tremor. It makes the first shot predictable at long range." The liaison touched the hinge. "This is a gate hinge." "Yes." "You built it from scrap," the liaison said. "Yes." The liaison wrote notes. "This has improved accuracy in 3 valleys. Command will want a full explanation." Velko answered before Milan could speak. "Command fears innovation. They call it risk. But this gives us control of our ground. It forces Germans to move slowly. Slow movement saves villages." The liaison closed his notebook. "I will report it. They will likely dismiss it. Then try it yourself," Milan said. The liaison hesitated, then placed his rifle on the rest. The hinge steadied the weapon instantly. He tested a dry aim. His eyebrows shifted. He understood. "This is simple," he said. "And effective." Milan nodded. "That is why it works." The liaison left before dusk. He carried 1 rest with him. Its wood was dented. Its hinge was old. But it held the lesson Milan wanted them to understand. Innovation did not require complexity. It required need. June 27, 1944. Weather turned harsh again. Cold wind cut through the trees. Clouds hung low. A German squad entered the Central Valley despite the danger. They moved with extreme caution. They advanced only 10 meters at a time. Their helmets turned constantly. Their rifles remained raised. They feared the unseen slopes. Milan, Luka, Petr, and 2 new fighters took positions on a high ridge. They did not fire. They observed. They waited until the squad retreated on their own without contact. The Germans no longer trusted the terrain. The gate rest had made the mountains dangerous in their minds. Velko studied their withdrawal from a distance. "They move like hunted men," Velko said. "They are," Milan replied. 3 days later, the Allies sent a radio message through a hidden contact. They reported unusual accuracy trends among partisan groups in the region. They noted long-range engagements without scoped rifles. They noted consistent shot placement across multiple ambushes. They wrote a single line that Velko read twice. Local fighters appeared to use wooden gate rests of unknown origin. The camp became quiet when they heard it. Not celebratory. Quiet. Respectful. They knew what it meant. Their work had reached ears beyond the mountains. But Milan did not seek recognition. He cared only that the valley stayed safe. That a shepherd could walk again between terraces. That a village could ring its church bell without fear. As July approached, German activity decreased. Patrols avoided certain slopes entirely. Some roads were left unused for days. The partisans gained freedom of movement for the first time in months. Villagers returned to abandoned homes. Women carried pails to springs again. Children helped gather firewood. Old men patched stone walls. Life did not return to normal, but it returned enough to breathe. One evening, Milan walked alone to a ridge overlooking his childhood pasture. He set the gate rest down. He placed his hand on the wooden surface. The grain felt warm, familiar, true to the land. He knew the war was not over. He knew danger would return. But for now, the mountains felt like home again. He sat in silence until the last light faded behind the ridge. August 2, 1944. The Chernovo Plateau held a rare stillness. No patrols moved along the valley roads. No engines echoed between the slopes. Weeks of long-range disruption had reshaped German behavior. They favored distant routes. They avoided exposed trails. They searched hills with binoculars before stepping into clearings. The mountains no longer belonged to them. Milan sat near a broken stone wall overlooking a narrow ravine. The old gate rest lay beside him. Its wood carried scars from rain and recoil. The hinge moved with a soft metallic strain. He held it as a farmer holds a tool. Not with pride. With familiarity. Velko approached and lowered himself beside Milan. The liaison sent another message, Velko said. He wrote that Allied officers noticed every shot pattern from this region. They believe accuracy improved because of wooden rests. Milan nodded. Velko continued. They want to know who made the first one. Milan brushed dirt from the hinge. Tell them no one. Velko understood. Recognition could bring attention. Attention brought danger. Innovation like this survived best when it stayed quiet. For the next weeks, battles shifted away from the plateau. Partisan units pushed toward supply roads. Germans redirected forces to other regions. The valleys that once suffered raids now heard simpler sounds. Horses, tools, children. The land regained its voice. When the autumn rains arrived, Milan returned to his childhood pasture for the first time since the war began. Sheep moved again across the grass. Their bells rang in soft patterns. The air smelled clean and cold. The slanted gate, the one that had inspired everything, still leaned against its post. The wood had darkened under storms. The hinge had rusted deeper, but the frame remained strong. Milan rested a hand on the gate. He felt its weight. He felt its story. Not a story of glory. A story of survival. A story of a shepherd who understood wind, slope, and silence more than any textbook of war. He thought of the patrols forced back by a single steady shot. He thought of villagers returning because fear no longer ruled the roads. He thought of the quiet improvement that spread from one simple tool built from scrap and memory. After the war, Milan lived in the same valley where he was raised. He kept a small flock. He mended fences. He rebuilt terraces. He walked the same paths his father had walked. When people asked about the war, he gave short answers. He let silence hold the rest. The old gate rest stayed in his home for years, leaned in a corner beside a shepherd's staff. Visitors never asked about it. They saw only a piece of wood and iron shaped by time. They did not understand what it had done. But Milan understood. Every winter morning when he walked out to check the flock, he passed his hand across the slanted hinge. He remembered fog lifting from the ridges. He remembered the smell of pine needles under his boots. He remembered the moment when a simple idea stopped a patrol that believed itself untouchable. No medals. No reports with his name. Only a quiet valley saved by wood and patience.